February 24th, 2022, Russian tanks crossed into Ukraine, and the entire world asked one question: how did it come to this? But here is what nobody told you. In 1991, Ukraine had 1,900 nuclear warheads, more than Britain, France, and China combined. They were, overnight, the third most dangerous nuclear power on Earth. 3 years later, they gave every single one away, voluntarily, in exchange for a document. I'm going to show you the exact decision, the room in Budapest, and the single word on that document that made 2022 inevitable. Not in 2022, not in 2014, in 1994. And by the end of this video, you will understand something that most world leaders still haven't: why paper guarantees are worth exactly that. Paper. This is Command Fault, where we study the single decisions that made collapse inevitable. December 25th, 1991, Christmas night, Moscow. Mikhail Gorbachev walks into a television studio and resigns. The Soviet Union, largest country in human history, gone before midnight. 15 new countries, one collapsing economy, and nuclear weapons scattered across 4 brand new nations with no chain of command, not one country with nuclear weapons. 4. Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Ukraine. Ukraine woke up on December 26, 1991, as the third largest nuclear power on Earth, without ever having asked to be one. They had no launch codes, no operational control. Those 1,900 warheads answered to Moscow. What happens when a brand new country, broke, unstable, surrounded by uncertainty, realizes it is sitting on the most powerful military leverage in the world? Does it keep them? Does it use them as a bargaining chip? Or does it trust the promises of the very powers that just watched an empire collapse? The answer is yes, yes, and yes, and what happened next is one of the most consequential structural failures of the 20th century. December 5th, 1994, Budapest, Hungary. Inside the Budapest Convention Center, the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia sat down with Ukraine. Ukraine is in the room, but Ukraine is not an equal at this table. Ukraine is the one being asked to give something up. The agreement signed that day is called the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances, and there is one word in that title that changes everything: not treaty, not guarantee. Assurances. Under the memorandum, Ukraine agrees to transfer all 1,900 nuclear warheads to Russia for dismantlement. Gone. In exchange, 3 commitments, 2 standard diplomatic clauses, and then Clause 3. 1. Respect Ukraine's borders. 2. No threat or use of force. 3. If Ukraine is threatened, go to the UN Security Council. Read that last one again. If Ukraine is threatened, go ask permission, not defend, not intervene. Ask permission. No automatic defense clause, no NATO path, no tripwire. It was not called a treaty because a treaty required Senate ratification, not a guarantee because a guarantee created a legal obligation to act. It was called an assurance, a diplomatic word for a promise with no enforcement mechanism. Words on paper, signed by 3 powers who retained the full legal right to do nothing. Some Ukrainian officials saw this clearly. They proposed keeping a symbolic arsenal, a deterrent. They were told the alternative was isolation, economic collapse, and zero Western support. Ukraine signed and tucked that document, all 1,900 reasons they no longer had leverage, into a filing cabinet where it would sit for exactly 20 years. Here is the question every Ukrainian official was asking in 1994, and the answer 2014 would give them. Before I show you, hit subscribe. Next episode, China and Taiwan, the 1949 decision that made that conflict inevitable. Now, back to Ukraine, and the moment that filing cabinet opened. February 2014, 20 years after Budapest. Mass protests in Kiev forced out President Yanukovych, who flees to Russia. A new government takes power. It looks west, toward Europe, away from Moscow. Russia's response is immediate, and it is military. Unmarked soldiers appear across Crimea, later acknowledged by Putin to be Russian forces. A referendum is held under disputed conditions. On March 18, 2014, Russia formally annexes Crimea, a piece of Ukrainian sovereign territory. The Budapest Memorandum has just been violated. So what do the signatories do? The United States issues a statement. The United Kingdom does the same. Economic sanctions are imposed. No military intervention. No enforcement mechanism triggered because there was no enforcement mechanism. If the memorandum was not enforced when Russia took Crimea, when would it ever be enforced? Separatist forces, which Western governments attributed to Russian backing, a claim Russia denied, begin fighting Ukrainian forces along a line that will not move for 8 years. The war smolders. It kills 14,000 people, and in Moscow, a calculation is being updated. The difference between what the West would promise and what it would actually do. Those 1,900 warheads handed over in 1994 were looking more consequential by the day. February 24, 2022. Before dawn. In cities across Ukraine, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol, Odessa, air raid sirens go off simultaneously. Russian forces cross the border from the north, the east, and the south at the same time. From Russia's stated position, a special military operation aimed at what Russia described as the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine and protection of Russian-speaking populations in the east and south. From Ukraine's position and the United Nations General Assembly, which voted 141-5 condemning the action, this was an invasion, a violation of sovereignty, a war. We are not here to adjudicate which framing is correct. We are here to understand how this moment was built across 30 years before it ever happened. Behind every miscalculation in history, there is a human being who made a wrong bet. That Kyiv would fall in days, that NATO would fracture, that the West would respond with sanctions, and nothing more. Some of those bets had historical logic. Some of them were catastrophically wrong. This is what we study at Command Fault. Not who was right, not who was wrong, the moment of decision, and the cascade that followed. The Budapest Memorandum is studied not because it worked, but because it failed, and the failure was built into the language from day one. Security guarantees are only as strong as one thing, not the paper, not the signatures, the willingness to act. 1994, assumed. 2008, questioned. 2014, tested. 2022, answered. And Ukraine, which handed over 1,900 nuclear warheads in exchange for that willingness, had nothing left to deter with. This is not a story about Ukraine or Russia or America. It is a story about what happens when international security is built on trust, without structures to enforce it. The world is full of similar documents, in similar filing cabinets, waiting for similar tests. That is the Command Fault of 1994, the single point of failure, signed, witnessed, and filed away, that made everything that followed not just possible, inevitable. Here is my question. Drop it in the comments right now. If you were Ukraine in 1994, would you have signed that document? Or would you have kept the weapons? No right answer, but a fascinating one. And I want to read yours below. Subscribe to Command Fault, because the next episode is China and Taiwan. And the decision that made that conflict inevitable was not made in 2024. It was made in 1949. And once you see it, you will understand why Taiwan is not just a territorial dispute. It is the next Budapest Memorandum waiting to be tested. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.